We'll make a start. Welcome to this evening's event. My name is Alan Friedman. I'm a director of the Australian Jewish Association. And just before we start, I want to note that this evening's event is in the memory of Nathan Mond. Nathan, many of you won't know, but he was a guy very interested in Israel advocacy. He was very interested in JF, the radio station, and he died suddenly a couple of months ago. And he was well known to a lot of us and very strong supporter. So I just thought we would have tonight's event in his memory. So that's Nathan Mond. Now, just for anybody that's new and may not know about the Australian Jewish Association, just in a couple of sentences, we started the AJA because we felt that there was a need for a Jewish communal organisation that wasn't drifting to the left the way most of them are. All our communal organisations have been drifting leftward steadily, and there didn't seem to be any organisation that represented those of us with conservative political views and also Torah-based views. Now that doesn't mean that it's a religious organisation, far from it, but at least part of our principles are that we are guided by Torah values, and that doesn't apply to any other organisation on the scene. So the AGA was formed about 2 years ago. We're busy, but we're busy primarily on Facebook. We're like a lot of organisations. We're building a membership base, and actually in terms of Facebook, we've got something like over 12,000 followers on Facebook. David Adler, I'll introduce our guest in a moment. David Adler was saying to me that we're about 20 followers short of being the number one Jewish communal organisation on Facebook. The ZFA happens to be number one, but they have a lot of kids going on schnatz, and there's a lot of youth activity. So we're almost at number one now. If anybody is a user of Facebook and doesn't follow the AJA, what you can do right now is take out your phone, go onto Facebook, and look for the AJA, Australian Jewish Association, and follow it. And if we can do that, we might actually get an extra 20 followers tonight. Now, the speakers this evening are David Adler, the President of the Australian Jewish Association, Gideon Rosner from the Institute of Public Affairs, and I'll introduce them more formally a little bit later. David Southwick is on his way. There is a function on at Elwood Shul tonight that he just absolutely had to go for, but he promised me that he will come straight here, so we should have him here in about 20 minutes or so. What we're planning to do is just start the discussion because the three speakers have got slightly different angles, and then when David comes, we'll get him involved. Okay, so firstly, I just wanted to thank South Caulfield Shul. This was where we started. This was our first venue a couple of years ago, and we launched the AJA in this very room. And the South Caulfield Shul board have been very good to us, so we want to thank them for letting us use their hall again, and also to the rabbi. Tonight's event, I must tell you that tonight's event was met with some protest. As usual, the militant left, the militant Jewish left in this town are very active, and they will stop at nothing to shut down any discussion that doesn't fit in with their views. And some of these Jewish leftists are the most intolerant people that you will ever see. And, I take the view that they have events, and do we care about their events? I don't care about their events. I mean, I don't particularly, want to go, but I certainly wouldn't think of shutting down their events. Just as an example, 2 weeks ago at Melbourne Uni, there was something called the Black Palestinian Solidarity event. So this was to discuss, and this went for a few days at Melbourne Uni, and I'll just quote from their blurb. It said that they're going to discuss the long-standing solidarity between Aboriginal and continent now known as Australia and across the globe in the struggle against settler colonial occupation. So this is what they're involved in. Now, one of the groups that was a partner of that event is the Australian Jewish Democratic Society.
All 12 of them.
Yeah. Now, they're a small organisation, but, you know, this is what they think. Okay, good luck to them, but, you know, we don't have a problem if they want to talk about that. I mean, it was a hate fest against Australia, a hate fest against Israel and the Jews, but we don't try to stop their events. The reverse doesn't always apply. They often try and shut us down. But the AJA is a very big success story. As I said, we're almost the #1 organisation on social media. In a way, we like to think of ourselves as ScoMo's Quiet Australians because we know that there is a lot of support out there for people who have more conservative views. And so many times people come up to me and say, look, I really like what you're doing, and, you know, we were doing Nothing Left, and I love your radio show, and, you know, I agree with you. And then they say, but I thought I was the only one. So there's a lot of people that are, you know, conservative based, but they're being shouted down and almost to the point of intimidation. So we are successful despite all of this, and I will point out also that most of the Jewish communal organisations are overtly hostile to us. So we're talking about the ECAJ, Executive Council of Australian Jewry, there's the JCCV in Victoria, there's the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies, there's AJAC, there's the Zionist Federation. All of those organisations seem to have a problem with us. We don't have a problem with them. We just say we only represent the people that share our views, but they seem to have a problem with us. And just out of interest, we invited quite a few people. Somebody actually said to me when we were putting this together, you don't have any women on the panel. Okay, fair enough. So we thought, well, let's ask. Let's see if there are any women that are interested in joining. So I sent an email to Emily Gianni from the Zionist Federation of Australia. No reply. I sent a note to Julie Nathan. She's an expert on anti-Semitism up in Sydney at the ECAJ. She was very interested, but we think that she got blocked from coming by the powers up there. I spoke to Professor Suzanne Rutland, who also is an academic studying anti-Semitism. She was too busy. Sharon Mittelman from AJAC, who is one of their writers on anti-Semitism, didn't get a reply. So this is the pattern that seems to happen with the AJA, but we don't care because we think that the more they push back, it just means that we're doing something right. So thank you all for your support. Okay, let's get started. So we're going to talk about anti-Semitism, and the first speaker will be David Adler. So Dr. David Adler is a medical graduate of the University of New South Wales, where he also received the Medical Faculty Prize for Proficiency in Leadership. He's formerly the Deputy Medical Secretary of the Australian Medical Association, a role which provided his training ground for policy and advocacy. He's been responsible for significant features of Australian health policy at both state and federal levels. And David's an active member of Sydney's Orthodox Jewish community and participates in Torah-related learning regularly. He has served in various community representative roles, Jewish community representative roles, and he comments and writes frequently on political issues, is a popular speaker at many Jewish community events, and is known to be outspoken on issues affecting the Jewish community and as an advocate for Israel. And David also appears regularly on Sky News, on The Outsiders and The Volt Report. So please welcome David Adler, who's going to give us a bit of an overview of anti-Semitism.
Thank you very much, Alan, for that introduction. I hope I can live up to it. It's in some way a bit of an unpleasant subject to discuss, but a subject we have to discuss. And I'm going to run through a few features and observation, but I'm going to end up with a little bit of optimism at the end. Of course, in Melbourne, So what's going on, and why is this happening, and what are we talking about? Well, it's probably useful to address the question first, what is anti-Semitism? And I guess if you ask people, including those in the room, most people will say, well, it's a hatred of Jews or an irrational bigotry or something like that, and of course you'd be right. But there are some official definitions of what anti-Semitism is, and the one that is most widely accepted is that of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, the IHRA. And I'll just read you one paragraph from it, which is the critical definition. Anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed towards Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and all their property, towards Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. So that's the formal definition, and it goes on and provides a number of working examples of what anti-Semitism is. Now, this is a particularly important document, and I'll come to it again, but it's important because, firstly, this is the one that Jeremy Corbyn had trouble swallowing, because one of the working examples concerns vilification of Israel. Now, you can criticise any country, of course, but if you there are certain attitudes towards Israel regarding it as a racist endeavour, comparing it to Nazism, applying standards to Israel that you apply to no other country that crosses the line from reasonable political commentary to anti-Semitism according to this definition. There's also a Torah perspective as to what anti-Semitism is. Now, I'm not going to drill down on it too much, but there is a really good video that Rabbi Jonathan Sachs produced where he describes anti-Semitism as like a virus that infects humanity, and it's a virus that morphs. And a quick review of history illustrates this. The Spanish Inquisition was about the hatred of the religion of Judaism, and under torture, Jews were forced to convert. Under the Soviet Union, there was a hatred of the Jewish culture. Brit Milah was banned. Teaching of Torah was banned. Nazis, of course, took a racial perspective. They hated the Jewish race. It didn't measure up to the Aryan purity, and their mission was to try to clear the world of the Jewish race. And now it's morphed again, because none of those things are politically correct in the current environment, and it's morphed into hatred of the Jewish state. And as I said, criticism of the country can be made, but there comes a point when anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. We see a number of groups that generate the anti-Semitic incidents. And in Europe, the dominant one is Islamic anti-Semitism. There are areas in Europe where if you are overtly visible as Jewish, it is unsafe to go. There was a major study done by the University of Oslo which looked at violent anti-Semitic events. So not just painting a swastika on a fence, but threatening people carrying out violent events. And they looked at 7 countries. In 6 of those 7 countries, the predominant perpetrators were young Muslims, and particularly those that had recently arrived. I'm going to show you one chart from that study, because they ask a question that's not often asked. And the question is, thinking about the incident where somebody attacked or threatened you in a way that frightened you, in other words, they're surveying the victims, because you were Jewish, who did this to you? So the victims identify who the perpetrators are, and they gave a variety of options to answer that question. someone with a right-wing view, someone with a left-wing view, someone with a Christian view, someone with a Muslim extremist view. So this particular chart shows 4 countries, France, Sweden, Germany and the UK. Now, it might be a bit hard to see if you're not in the front 2 rows, but the green bars, which are the tallest one in each of those countries, represent the proportion that the victims identified as Muslim extremists carrying out those activities or threats. The next largest one in 3 of the 4 countries is perceived as those with a left-wing view. In Germany, the second largest one is those with right-wing views, etc. So that is one of the largest studies done, and that's that particular result. The second area where we have seen growth, as you know, is, and this is particularly worrying, is the mainstreaming of anti-Semitism in the political left. UK Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn is now being investigated by the Equality and Human Rights Commission in the UK. It's the first time that a major political party has been subject to such an investigation. The inquiry has received over 15,000 pages of evidence. I don't know what the result will be, but Jeremy Corbyn in 2018 was named one of the top 10 anti-Semites by the Simon Wiesenthal Centre, and they probably do as much as any organisation in investigating and combating anti-Semitism. Third category we need to call out is the one that is predominantly called out in Australia, which is the neo-Nazis. And we have seen a couple of groups form, but they're noisy on social media. The biggest one was called Anti-Semitism Forum. It's been taken down. Their website and social media accounts have been eliminated. That's the group that's responsible for putting up some vile anti-Semitic posters in universities and other places. There was a group that infiltrated the New South Wales National Party, and once they were identified, they were expelled. And the final area that I want to talk about, or at least just mention, and it's one that I don't think anyone else has called out to date, and it's an uncomfortable one particularly for us to talk about, but it needs to be mentioned, and that is Jewish anti-Semitism. There are certain groups of Jews who also cross the line in their vilification of Israel, comparing it to a Nazi endeavour, etc., etc. But there's one example that I want to show you. When the inquiry into UK Labour is underway, there was a most extraordinary submission made to that inquiry by an organisation called Jewish Voices for Labour. That's their logo. And essentially the essence of their submission is that Jewish Voices for Labour has urged the Equality and Human Rights Commission to ignore anti-Semitism that is abusive and insulting to Jews but not unlawful in the investigation into the Labour-Jew hate crisis. So what we have here in the UK is an example of not just Jews making criticism of Israel, but actually defending anti-Semitism provided it is not in breach of a specific British law. So if you want to promulgate conspiracy theories about Jews or vilification of Israel in a way that doesn't specifically break the law, according to this group, that is fine. Alliances, most peculiar alliances, are formed on the issue of anti-Semitism known as the Red-Green Alliance, which is the alliance between the political left and the Islamic extremists. And we see this in many countries that on the left of politics, particularly if they've got a significant Islamic community, they get involved in the politics and it brings a level of anti-Semitism and Israel hatred into that. I guess the squad in the Democratic Party in the US, particularly Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, would be the poster kids for that sort of phenomenon. But there are other peculiar alliances. We've seen some of the Jews and Islamists, the sort of self-hating Jews, if you like, form alliances, and even someone who might be regarded as a neo-Nazi will form an alliance as well. The most spectacular example recently was arguably the best-known white supremacist in the US is David Duke. So he praises Ilhan Omar for her anti-Semitic and anti-Israel commentary. Most peculiar thing, but there we have it. Now, in Australia, our Jewish community organisations are very quick, as they should be, to call out any neo-Nazi activity. But in the other categories that I've mentioned, seem to be much more reluctant, or certainly without the volume. Now, we should call out the neo-Nazi activity, but we need to call out all sources of anti-Semitism, and we will certainly do that. And you've got an article that I published, and I've been on television talking about it as well, and there's a link to a video if you want to see that, where we have been actively doing that publicly and at a political level. I'm going to conclude with just one point, which is what can be done. And most of our activity in this country to date has been to console the victims, to look after the victims and to try to provide some education where it is possible to those perpetrators. So occasionally we've had an event in a school where the perpetrators are taken to a Holocaust museum and given a bit of an education, and the victims are consoled, etc., etc. There has not been any effort, to my knowledge, or no particular idea as to how to make a systemic change. Now, there's no silver bullet, and I'm not going to pretend for a moment that this is a cure, but I'm going to share with you tonight an effort that we are making, that we have started. I mentioned the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance at the beginning. Australia became a member of the IHRA in just June of this year. Good move. We have asked government to consider passing a parliamentary resolution to formally adopt in this country the IHRA definition in full. But not just, well, firstly that has an important symbolic effect from the elected leadership, if we can get it through, that anti-Semitism is unacceptable in Australia, and the Parliament is making a clear statement to that effect. But we're also asking for some action subsequently, and that is that the Minister for Education should write to the universities and to his state counterparts to write to the schools that the IHRA definition in full be adopted in our educational facilities as a framework. One of the things that we have learnt from the events in Melbourne that I mentioned is that the schools and the principal and the Department of Education handled the subject woefully. They fluffed around, etc. I hope David Southwick arrives soon, because he does deserve a compliment for him having raised it at the political level. So we're starting. We need a person in the Senate to move we've drafted the resolution. AJA has provided such a resolution. I had a former political staffer assist with the format of it, and we've approached the Senator and a member of the House of Reps to move such a resolution. The Senator is Senator Eric Betts, because he's the chairman of the parliamentary Friends of Israel now, and the member of the House of Reps that we have met to discuss this with is Dave Sharma, because he's the former Israel ambassador. We met Dave Sharma Friday, 8th of November, the Friday before, and he was very positive about the idea. Now, I don't know whether it will happen, but if it happens, we'll know where it was initiated. And that's what we're trying to do, to actually make a systemic difference, to provide a framework and the tools through our educational facilities. So that's all I want to say on the subject, and I very much appreciate everyone coming out tonight to support our event, and hopefully we'll bring you more interesting and worthwhile discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Now we're going to hear from...
Can you turn up the volume, please?
They're on the show.
Yes, okay.
No one hear me?
Okay, that's interesting. We're going to hear from our next guest, and then we'll have some discussion, and hopefully by that time David Southwood will arrive, and then we'll hear from him. So we're going to hear a little bit about the political implications of anti-Semitism. Now, if you don't know about the Institute of Public Affairs, it's an independent, not-profit public policy think tank dedicated to preserving and strengthening the foundations of economic and political freedom. Now, this has been going since 1943, and the IPA has been at the forefront of political and policy debate, defining the contemporary political landscape. The IPA supports the free market of ideas, the free flow of capital, a limited and efficient government, evidence-based public policy, rule of law, and representative democracy. So they all sound pretty good. Now, Gideon Rosner is the Director of Policy at the Institute of Public Affairs. Prior to joining the IPA, Gideon spent several years practicing as a lawyer at one of Australia's largest commercial law firms, as well as several months as interim general counsel of an ASX 200 company. He's also served as an advisor to ministers in the Abbott and Turnbull governments, advising on areas as diverse as electoral reform and Northern Australian economic development. He holds a Bachelor of Laws with honours and a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Melbourne. Gideon has been published in The Australian, The Daily Telegraph, Herald Sun, The Age and The Spectator, and he has appeared on Sky News, 2GB, 3AW, ABC and Network 10's The Project. He's a rising star on this political landscape. So to hear about some of the political implications of anti-Semitism, please welcome Gideon Rosner.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for a very, very generous introduction, and thank you to the AJ for having me tonight. Thank you to my very good mate, David Adler, for inviting me along, and look, it's fantastic to be here. It's great to be here with so many friends and fellow travellers, and look, I'm particularly happy to be saying this, but I think it's great that we actually got to have this gathering to begin with. Now, I understand that there's been a lot of argy-bargy with this event tonight. As David said, lunatics have been calling up and down, threatening board directors, threatening indeed, I think there was a speaker who had to pull out tonight because of people who don't want us to sit around and talk to each other. And I know about platforming, I know about Twitter bans and all sorts of problems with free speech in this country, but it makes me very sad that it's happening in our own community, and I think we need to fight it, and good on the synagogue for having us tonight anyway. Now, when it comes to anti-Semitism in Australia, I guess it's a conversation for me personally. I feel a little bit disingenuous, I suppose, talking about it in a sense, because I personally struggle to think of any times really other than a few stupid jokes or off-colour comments where I've experienced any anti-Semitism at all. I think what we need to remember in the course of this discussion is that Australia is one of the most pluralistic, tolerant countries in the world, and the vast, vast majority of Australian people are decent. The vast, vast majority of Australian people do not have an anti-Semitic bone in their body. Certainly, through my experience, and I've been bouncing around non-Jewish political circles since I was 16. That said, there is a problem, and I think the problem is this. The problem is that in this day and age, everybody is so sensitive about anything that has a whiff of intolerance about it. There are people who will flip out about people using the wrong pronouns or something, and see racism and intolerance everywhere. But when it comes to anti-Semitism, not only do they turn a blind eye to it, not acknowledge it, they will actually actively engage in it without any self-awareness that what they are doing is deeply anti-Semitic. And to give you an example, I'm very active on Twitter, like every other political tragic, worth his salt. Not that I recommend it; it's not for the faint-hearted. But there are a lot of people on Twitter who hate my organisation, who think that we control the known universe and are evil and everything else. And I've got one woman in particular whose name is Ellie. She's this nut. She lives up in Noosa, and all she does is send around memes about my organisation, about the IPA, and how we're destroying the environment, the earth, and what have you. Anyway, late last year I was temporarily co-hosting on a little show called Outsiders for a little while, and in the course of that I made a lot of comments about Israel, because it came up quite a lot, as it does on Sky News. And that prompted, one particular discussion prompted a big Twitter reaction. And one bloke posted a question saying, is Rosner a Jew by any chance? And posted the most horrible cartoon of, like a Nazi-era cartoon of some bloke with a really big hook nose. And this Ellie woman, this feral looking Ellie woman chimed in and started saying, yes, he is a Jew, along with, and rattled off a few names of my Jewish colleagues. So I jumped in and I said, well, hang on. You are this woman who's accusing me of being this racist, of being a Nazi, ironically. And here you are saying something that's terribly anti-Semitic. You're obviously a low-life. You're obviously a hypocrite. And, take your comments somewhere else. You know what happened to me then? All these people on Twitter piled onto me and said, how dare you speak to a woman that way? So, you can't win. And I think, and look, it touches on some more serious incidents, which is what David touched on briefly, which is what was reported recently, being schools, non-Jewish schools, where Jewish students are made to kiss the feet of Muslim boys and are called Jewish cockroaches and being beaten up and all sorts of other things. And the response to those schools, to those incidents, has been absolutely woeful. The kids are going to do cruel and stupid things, and they should be, disappointing and everything else. But the teachers turn around and say, oh, well, there's nothing we can do. It happened outside school premises. I'm sorry. All we hear about these days is anti-bullying measures, anti-bullying funds, anti-bullying programs, and if those students who are harassed at these schools were black or Chinese or gay or anything else, the teachers would rightly, as they should, move heaven and earth to fix it and to discipline the students involved. Yet when it comes to Jewish students, they turn a blind eye. But I rack my brain to think, why is it that the left don't care about anti-Semitism when they are so hot and bothered by every form of intolerance under the sun? And I think the difference is this. Left-wing anti-racism and pro-tolerance, pro-diversity, guff, it's not driven by human decency. It's not actually driven by the ethic of tolerance. It's not driven by the old Martin Luther King, judge a man by the content of his character, not the colour of his skin. Left-wing anti-racism rhetoric is about victimhood. It is about which group of people, whether it be gender or race or class or sexual preference, is more victimised than the others. And Jews don't make good victims, especially Jews in Melbourne, Australia. I mean, we do pretty well as a community. We have fantastic community infrastructure. We have the best schools in the state. Generous people in our community who donate to all manner of causes and are great upstanding citizens. We do not fit the left's bill of victims. In fact, in some corners of left-wing thought, on their twisted logic, Jews are the oppressors. It's not uncommon to read in left... Oh, and I should acknowledge the traditional owner of the land on which we meet, the member for Caulfield, David South. Very solid citizen. It's not uncommon to read about something called Jewish privilege. In fact, I've read somewhere that a piece explaining why Haredi Jews are being beaten up in Brooklyn, New York, as look, it's oppressed minorities who are reacting against Judaism as an expression of whiteness. I don't even know what that's supposed to mean. But these are the loopy ways in which the left can not only, again, tolerate anti-Semitism, but rationalise and explain it away. And then, of course, there's the other great perfume with anti-Semites in the 21st century, which is, I'm not an anti-Semite, I'm an anti-Zionist. I'm not an anti-Semite, I just speak out about Israel. Oh, by the way, how dare you try to shut me up from making criticisms of Israel because, Israel happens to be the Jewish state. That's a double standard. And look, there's nothing wrong with making criticisms of Israel, but it's the way in which it is done. It's the ferocity and the intensity and the double standard. I mean, there are criticisms made about human rights abuses in Israel that are not made about any other country in the world, ones that have a much worse record of human rights than Israel does. And in explaining the political economy of the Israel issue, a lot of left-wing people inadvertently are reverting to the same sort of anti-Semitic language that has haunted us for centuries. It's not uncommon to hear people like Bob Carr, former Premier of New South Wales, former Foreign Minister of Australia, talk about the Jewish lobby and how insidious and pernicious and sneaky and underhanded they are. I mean, that is getting very close to the bone of old-fashioned Jewish stereotypes. In fact, it's not uncommon to hear about the Zionist conspiracy, literally the Zionist conspiracy, the conspiracy theory that was used to vilify Jews for generations. And the other point to be made about criticism of Israel is that it is one thing to talk about settlements or Palestinian rights or the Oslo Accords or some other thing. But too often, the self-proclaimed anti-Zionists will protest any Israeli person, in fact any Jewish person, no matter who they are and what their view is. And the example I go to is when Tzipi Livni, I think, was out. When was Tzipi Livni out here? Reasonably recently.
Yeah, 2 months ago.
Former member of the Knesset. She spoke at Moriah College, and a bunch of lunatics went to placard Moriah College. Now, firstly, to protest an Israeli politician speaking to a kids' school, I think is a pretty low act. I don't think that's a particularly appropriate thing to do, but freedom of assembly, we have that in this country. But if you're going to protest an Israeli politician, I mean, why protest Tzipi Livni? These are people who say that the Israelis are building settlements in the West Bank and that's making peace impossible. All right, if that's your view, fair enough. But Tzipi Livni, don't forget, this is a woman who resigned from the Likud party over the issue of settlements and joined a government led by Ehud Olmert that literally dragged settlers out of the Gaza Strip kicking and screaming and demolished their homes. If you are so concerned about settlements and about colonialism, then protesting somebody with probably the same views as you is it's judging somebody by their nationality, but more to the point by their religion. So look, I think that we would do our own cause a disservice if we turned into a bunch of Uncle Leos. If you get the Seinfeld reference and see anti-Semitism everywhere and anywhere and get overly defensive. But there are double standards that we should call out, that we shouldn't stand for. But look, we're an optimistic organisation at the IPO, and I want to leave you with a message of optimism, and that is that, off-colour jokes are regrettable. Graffiti that we've seen is disgusting. It's certainly regrettable seeing what the Greens and Labour Party are doing, but again, I make the point, I really do think that we do live in a great country, and that the majority of Australians are not anti-Semitic. It's just we need to be concerned about the small pockets in which it's filling up. So with that, I'll hand back over to Alan.
Thanks. I want to welcome David Southwood. We'll go back to Plan 8 as since David's here, we'll ask him to say a few words. Now, I don't think there's anybody here that will not know David Southwick, but just in case you don't, he's been the member of Caulfield in the Victorian Legislative Assembly since 2010. In 2018, David was appointed the Shadow Minister for Police, Shadow Minister for Community Safety, and Shadow Minister for Corrections. And I asked David to come along tonight because, as we all know, there's been a couple of incidents in recent times. And I'm hoping David can tell us a little bit about what's been happening. Perhaps there may be things that have gone on behind the scenes that we don't know about. So, David, thanks for joining us. And what I'd like you to do is just give us your take on anti-Semitism in the local area, and in particular, can you touch on those school incidents? Please welcome David South.
Thank you very much, Alan. My apologies for not being here early. We had a police remembrance service just up the road, and Rabbi Rabin, who we're on his hallowed ground here, he's also a police chaplain, so he was there with me tonight as well. Gideon, if I could recognise you, doing some great work out there in the media, and also Dave Bevel doing some great work as well. With the comments I'm going to make, particularly around some of the incidents in the Jewish day school, in the schools with the Jewish children, could I particularly reference having David there raising that in the broader media and keeping the pressure up, because that was very, very important. And it was something that we're going to have to continue to do to ensure that we get some real action. I'll touch that shortly. So if we go back to, I want to take you back to August, because in August we had the first local bit of activity within the school communities, and that is the ACHPA practice exam. And we're now at the point where the VCE students are completed their exams. But back in August, we had that ACHPA practice exam that had materials on that pretty much said that Israelis were persecuting Arabs and burning down their houses, and how terrible it would be to live in a place like Israel when you were being persecuted by Israelis. And we called that out, and you would have all probably followed that along in the media. It took a very, very long time for us to firstly receive that apology, and it was after numerous lots of pressure. And I've got to say, I think the ultimate pressure by having their funding withdrawn was probably the main reason why we ended up getting the apology, because it built the momentum up to say, well, you know what, this group receives funding from the Victorian government and puts out materials that, forget being hurtful, but they're factually incorrect and without any of the proper checks and balances. It took a very, very long time to get the apology. Well, we got the apology, which had a few kind of clauses in it, and then we pushed it further, and then we got a reserved apology, a full apology then, and it subsequently was going to be fully investigated. Well, that was back in August. We're now in November, and we still don't have the report released in terms of what is happening when it comes to ensuring that that organisation doesn't see future activities like they have had. What are the checks and balances to ensure that the educators that are providing these materials, that those materials are checked, and what is being done? You know, is this something that is systemic? Is it the individual that put up those materials, put other papers and been teaching in a classroom? We need to understand a lot more about that. We're still waiting for that report to be released. And it's important that I wanted to touch on that because I want to come back to that at the end when we talk about the two school incidents. Since then, we've had also a number of other issues. I've picked up the tail end of Gideon's point talk tonight, but certainly there's a lot of the anti-Semitic graffiti that we've had on the Nilex building, on Eliza's Cafe in Chadstone. Again, some of it is not new to us, some of it is new to us. Certainly it's not new to us to having graffiti locally. Horrific as it was, we saw Emmy Monash graffitied in January outside of Emmy Monash with swastikas painted on a home of Holocaust survivors. You know, you couldn't get closer to the bone as having something like that. But we're starting to see, when we saw the graffiti on a business, a cafe in Chadstone, of a Jewish cafe owner, that you wouldn't know that it was owned by a Jewish cafe owner unless you actually knew her, and that was targeted to her, which was absolutely horrific. So that we're seeing all of that. We're seeing the Blood and Honour concert that was planned to go on in Melbourne, which was the idea of a band that wanted to put on a concert with the kinds of lyrics of shipping people back in body bags, and Jews own the media and Jews own everything and all that kind of stuff. Usual suspects there. But again, you know, that was, again, by lots of pressure that ended up not going ahead. But I suppose one of the things that really cut absolutely to the claw is what we've seen with those two Jewish children, aged 5 and 12. And it does because you would hope that these kinds of things don't happen in educational facilities. You would hope that the way out in terms of combating anti-Semitism is through education. You would hope that the very people that could help us in terms of being able to explain those that are ignorant are our teachers, are our educators, and you would hope that schools would be a safe place. You would really hope that schools would be a safe place. And I think that was probably the most confronting for many of us when we saw the image that was shown right across the world of the Jewish boy kissing the feet of the Muslim boy. And the 5-year-old, which really, there hasn't been a lot spoken about the 5-year-old, but a 5-year-old to be targeted because he was a boy, a Jewish boy circumcised, being called Jewish vermin and a cockroach. And the school's answer to dealing with his situation was to use the teachers' bathrooms. You know, that's just appalling. That is appalling. So on these occasions, we continue to call it out. We call it out with the Minister for Education. And when that first happened, we asked for a full investigation. We asked for investigation to be done independently and the recommendations to be released publicly. There was an investigation. It's being done by the department, so it's not an independent investigation. And we have been told, certainly the victims have been told that they will receive a report. We're still waiting to see whether the report will be public or not. But we were told that when the investigation started at the beginning of October, that the investigation would be completed by the end of October, and those parents have still not been told what the result of the investigation has shown. More importantly, I mean, obviously the safety and well-being of those children are paramount, are absolute key, and there's been a lot of support for those kids and those families, which is very, very important, and so that should be. But again, we need to kind of understand what's the way forward. What is the way forward in some of those schools? How prevalent is this? We know that there are a number of parents that won't come forward, that a lot of kids that won't come forward, a lot of kids that just deal with this in their own time. And it's not just in schools, it's in sporting groups as well, particularly in a lot of sporting on footy fields and alike. And it's how they're dealt with. And so that's our concern in terms of what is being done in terms of dealing with that situation, what support is needed, and largely, what is the education that's going to be provided to, and again, if you're dealing with a group of 5-year-olds and 12-year-olds, the way forward, and I want to be focused tonight on a very positive message, and I want to get a bit spiritual because we're in the shul, but I'm told the Lubavitcher Rabbi says that to fight anti-Semitism, you need to start to use pro-Semitism. You need to actually start to talk about goodness over evil. You need to say, you know, if there is darkness, where's the light that we can turn on all of this? And so I use that in just about everything that we do in the Parliament, educating my colleagues whether we take them to Israel. We're about to take a group on the March of the Living, the first time parliamentarians have ever been to a March of the Living program. So these are the kinds of things we need to do to educate. But what are we going to do in the schools? Now, there are a whole range of different programs that I made available in the Parliament last week to the Minister and said, well, look, we've got a whole lot of things that Courage to Care, the Jewish Holocaust Centre, the Anti-Defamation Commission. There are a number of programs, UJEB, run a lot of really good programs that the Minister and the government need to look at being made available not just to our schools, but to all schools, all the way through. This morning I was at the Holocaust Centre for teachers that have been to Yad Vashem on the Gandil program. Now, there are hundreds of these teachers from the broader schools that are going to Yad Vashem, that are learning about the Holocaust, and they are effectively taking that message into the schools, and they're looking at anti-bullying programs in the schools through the eyes of what they've learnt at Yad Vashem. Courage to Care run a very good program, and probably the best thing that I've seen is out of a school in Cranbourne called Al-Kira College, Al-Kira Secondary College, which is largely a school of Muslim, African kids, a whole range of different diverse kids, and I can tell you there is pretty much guaranteed not a Jewish kid in that school. But for the last 6-8 years they've been running a program on the commemorating of the Holocaust and learning the Holocaust. They do a whole program at the school and an assembly. And at the end of that assembly, they have kids from Mount Scopus that come to the school and meet with the kids and talk to the kids, and it's run by the kids themselves. Now, they're the kinds of things that are happening at the moment and need to happen a lot more in a targeted and focused way that is not happening. So they're the things that we've called on the government to look at, being able to fund and support, understand how prevalent the anti-Semitism is, being able to go through the schools and provide an opportunity for people to be able to come forward and report anti-Semitism, and to be able to get the support needed if they're being victimised. So we've asked for that, and we're still waiting to see what the results are of that. A couple of other things I just wanted to raise as well. There's another group, while we have our Friends of Israel, we have another group in the Victorian Parliament, believe it or not, which is the Friends of Palestine. There are no Liberal members of that group. There is a Greens member or two, and there's one Labor member, Bronwyn Halfpenny. Bronwyn Halfpenny last year supported a group. Now, you've probably heard of the Jerusalem Peace Prize, which in a few days' time, the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, will be receiving the Jerusalem Peace Prize in Sydney. A couple of years ago, Marsha Thompson and I received it in Melbourne. The Palestinian Network decided in their wisdom that they'd create their own Jerusalem Peace Prize, and these are people that can be, if you like, antagonists towards Israel, and those can do their best at being able to support the Palestinian cause would be awarded a Peace Prize. The Australian Palestinian Advocacy Network, APAN, is a pro-BDS group. It actively supports BDS, and that group, as I say, was supported by the member for Brunswick, Bronwyn Halfpenny, at the last year, just before the election. And we made some noises about that, and Bronwyn Halfpenny withdrew her support. It did go ahead, but she withdrew her support and her booking. Surprise, surprise, there's no election year this year, and she's booked it again in her name, and it's set to go ahead in a few weeks' time in Parliament. We're making some noises about that as well. Again, the reason why I think it's important to call these things out is, whether it's anti-Israel, anti-Semitism, we need to, call this stuff out for what it is. We need to ensure that we have friends from both sides of Parliament, but not when it's convenient, but when it's needed. And sometimes it's very easy to be supporting Israel on good times, or the Jewish community on good times, but we need to stand up during the hard times as well, and that's why we think that's really, really important. There are some real challenges. There is, certainly what I'm seeing. This afternoon I was sent a text from somebody that's living in Carlisle Street that received a note on his car only today, calling him a Jewish pig and to get out of here and all that kind of stuff. And he's living with his family in Carlisle Street, and that will be something that we've got to deal with. So that stuff is prevalent. It's around. It's around us all the time. We've got to stand strong. We've got to work to fight this stuff out. We've got to educate others. But I do want to leave you with one bit of optimism, and it's a very personal one, and it's a story I want to tell you about my son. So my son, who's now in year 12, in year 9, we decided to send him to Geelong Grammar because we felt that we wanted to broaden his education and to get a broader experience of the world. And in his first couple of weeks, he was grabbed by a group of boys in a fun, joking kind of way, and at Tippetop they have to make their own fires and make their electricity because it's all kind of very much out in the bush and kind of look after themselves. So they have a boiler room. So they grabbed Tyler by his arms, marched him across into this room, and they said, "We're taking you to the chambers." And he rang us and he told us that pretty much straight away. And you all know my wife. You know that she's straight on this. And she said, "Right, we'll fix this up." And Tyler said to us, "No, I don't want you to fix it up. I want you to leave it with me." And he wasn't the only one, by the way. There was a Muslim kid who was called September 11, and he was given his set of names and all the rest of it. And different kids from different backgrounds were all given their names, called different names. Fast forward, Tyler's finishing year 12 at Geelong Grammar. Those boys that marched him into that thing have all been and had Shabbos with us. They've all been to most of the Rosh Hashanahs, Yom Kippurs. They've eaten matzah in Geelong Grammar when the matzah comes in over Passover. They've seen it all, and they're part of his best lot of friends, and they've been educated about what they thought was a silly joke is offensive. And he did it his way. Now, I think it's a really important lesson for all of us, because sometimes we can call people out, we can target those kids can then go away and probably, apologise in public, and behind closed doors probably not learn much at all. But those kids have changed because they've learned something from that. Probably the final thing in terms of in the commemoration day at the school, all the kids got up and said their little 2 minutes about their time at Geelong Grammar, and Tyler mentioned again that how proud he is to be a Jewish boy at a school and being able to share some of his journey, his life and his culture with that broader school. So I share that with you. It's a personal reflection. I haven't said that to anyone before, so it's not something that I really. I know some of you are filming and all the rest of it, but I do say it because I think it's an important lesson for us all. It's a lesson for us to really, we've got to approach this stuff, call it out when we call it out, but also approach things with optimism, educate people the best way that we possibly can. And those that are real haters, those that can't be educated, that's where we need the law to protect us. But those that are just, unfortunately, that lack the knowledge and the awareness, that's where we need to come in and help them to ensure that we can all promote pro-Semitism as a way forward, not continue to have the rise of anti-Semitism that we're seeing. Thank you.
Now we've got plenty of time for discussion, so I'm going to invite questions from the floor. But just before I do, I've got one question today that just niggled me a little bit. And David, you said that regarding the two school incidents, there was going to be a report, and you weren't sure if they would be made public. Now we've got public state schools and the Department of Education. Why wouldn't they be public? Why wouldn't these reports be available? And if they're not, can we do anything about it?
It niggles me as well. So we'll just keep asking for them, and we hope that they will be made public. It's the same with the ASPA materials as well. We're not sure whether that's going to be made public. We've just got to continue to put the pressure on. It's interesting that nothing had really happened. I raised it in Parliament on the Wednesday to say, where is the report? We want it to be public. We want to at least be able to see what the recommendations are. And we want to ensure that the department is working with the community, because the Jewish community are here to help. And I listed off a whole range of organisations that are there to be able to provide support to the department, to be able to provide the education materials to the department to be able to go forward. Interestingly enough, the very next day we had the president of the JCCV in with the minister, and I won't mention one of the organisations, but one of the organisations that deliver programs in their head as well. And I'm told that they're speedily trying to look at doing some stuff. So departments work very, very slowly. Again, it's up to all of us, to write, to ask questions, to put pressure on, to ensure that we don't take the head off, particularly on politicians. And if I do the wrong thing, then you should be calling me out as well. That's where we need to put the pressure. Back to my story just quickly. If you want to put pressure on anyone, then hold governments to account, hold those people that should know better to account, hold schools to account. I met with Cheltenham Secondary College. I had the school council members in my office, and we had a pretty heated exchange about a number of things, which I won't go into the detail. But again, they asked me for advice, and I said, well, we've got a whole lot of programs that we'd love to be able to put in the school, and I can introduce you to a whole lot of great people that would love to be able to take the kids through these programs. And I offered that. I'm still waiting, and now I don't blame the school, because I think the department has grabbed hold of the school. What horrified me, and I'm yet to have this stand anywhere near corrected, but the principal put out a statement pretty soon after saying that there was kind of nothing to be seen here, and everything's okay. And I was told by members in that room that statement wasn't put together by the principal, but put together by the department, and the principal signed his name on the bottom of that letter. So and they're the department that are doing the investigation. So that is why we need to put pressure, absolute pressure, and hold governments to account. And if we don't get the results that that should be expected, we need to call that out.
Thanks, David. By the way, I did invite the principal of the Cheltenham Secondary School to come here tonight, but I never got a reply. So funny about that. Okay, over to you. If there are any questions or comments, then now's the time to we'll start with Moishe then.
Mr. Southwick, in regard to what you just spoke about,
speak up, please.
in regard to what we just discussed now, the issues with the schools and the presentations that you were making, did you bring the local member where the school is located into that discussion, into that matter, or were you just doing it on your own?
I'm ready. Okay, so Hawthorne I haven't had conversations with. Cheltenham I have. Cheltenham. Thank you. Cheltenham I had discussions with the local member. Yes. I had discussions with the local member. I didn't seek to contact the school. The school actually contacted me. So I think because I was quite vocal about the issues, the school saw me as being an avenue to be able to take the pressure off the school. So that was kind of the beginning of the meeting, and I said, look, I'm a member of Parliament, I'm not the spokesperson for the whole community. I can give you some advice, but don't think that I can walk here and just make everything go away, because that's just not the way things work. But at the same time, was very, very much prepared to help in any way, and I stand willing to help that school and any school. It's a good point that you raise. My geographical boundary of Caulfield, if that's all I did in terms of what I think, that would be wonderful. But there are many times where people of our community that don't live in our community come and ask me for help, and I do that regardless of where I live.
If I may, the question question was, are you a lone wolf dealing with this, or do the other members of Parliament appreciate that this is an issue that they ought to go to bat in for, and particularly when it happens in their local constituency?
Yeah, so on our side, I've been absolutely working alongside with our Shadow Minister for Education. So Cindy McLeish, so she's been well informed with everything that I've done, and I've discussed that all the way through along with our leader. We haven't heard anything from the member for Hawthorn, the state member for Hawthorn. Josh Frydenberg had both of the parents in in his office almost within a couple of days of it happening. Quite frankly, the other side's been pretty silent on this stuff. Now, the minister, in fairness to him, came out pretty strongly and said how terrible this stuff is. But as I said, we're still waiting for that report. So, I don't blame other local members. Brad Rosewell, who's the member for Sandringham, he's been a very, very strong advocate and a great friend of the Jewish community.
Very good man.
Very, very good friend of the Jewish community, very solid on all this stuff, and he's been certainly working with me on this stuff at the local level.
Okay, Robert?
No.
I want to direct a question to David. I want to direct a question to David Adler because of your connection with in federal areas. As you've been very active. So, as a result of the gay marriage legislation that came in, that's all right. We were assured by the very vocal left-wing LGBT lobby that religious freedom would not be affected and they have respect for religion and so on. So, as a result of that, I believe, as I recall, Philip Ruddock was charged with presenting some sort of a formula or a bill to protect religious freedom. I just wonder if you know where that's going, because from what I see, there is a lot of anti-religious fervour coming from the left, and particularly from that group. And I think it would be a danger if, despite their assurances, it would be a danger to not just, it would be a cause of further anti-Semitism if religious freedom was not protected, not just for Jewish religion, but for all religions. If a secular society prevailed.
Right, that's a whole big issue on its own. But I'll tell you a little of what we've done. And your preamble was correct. We were promised that there would be certain protections in place prior to the legislation. Those protections did not arrive. Philip Ruddock was charged with heading an expert committee to make recommendations to the government. So we did take it up, and AJA made a submission to the Ruddock inquiry. Jeff Block, who's sitting towards the front here, came to Sydney and was part of he did most of the work in putting the submission together, because it was to advise on what legislative protections were required. We were given, we were actually called before the Ruddock Committee, which was fairly unusual, and they'd allocated a time slot of 45 minutes, but kept us for an hour and a half. So they must have thought that some of our ideas and concepts. So we can provide you with a copy of the submission, which gives you our position in detail, Robert. I don't know if the government knows where we're going with this at the moment. Frankly, the Attorney General has done a lot of work. I've also met with the major Christian groups that are lobbying. I've met with Martin Isles, who's the CEO of the Australian Christian Lobby, and the Bishop of South Sydney, whose name escapes me at the moment, the Anglican Bishop of South Sydney, is heading a coalition of Christian groups, and he's done a lot of work, and we've met with them as well. The Jewish, we're a small piece in this whole thing, but we're in there calling for the protections of religious freedoms, and you're right, it sort of overlaps a bit So I was going to comment about the politically correct left, and our panel said earlier how roof organisations tend to be very, very careful not to offend the politically correct left. What I was going to ask is, do any of the panelists have a view on communal contact with Pauline Hanson? Because while we might want to avoid Fraser Anning as an anti-Semite and racist, I'm not aware that Pauline Hanson particularly is anti-Semitic. She once passed a comment, "What have I ever done against the Jewish people?" We've tended to avoid her because of her perceived racism in other areas. So I wondered if anyone from the AJA or any of our panelists have a view as to whether Pauline Hanson should be shunned or not, whether we can constructively engage with her, because she does in fact represent a quite sizable portion of the population and she's commented on things like rural difficulties and economic problems of people in rural areas who are quite genuinely suffering, and maybe the Jewish people would have solidarity. So I just ask, have you an opinion on, do we shun Pauline Hanson and other right-wing conservatives while we engage with the Liberal Party in the excellent job they do? Are we against engaging with more extreme people who are not necessarily anti-Semitic?
Just while I'm walking back out, I will just make the point that when Michael and I were doing Nothing Left a couple of years ago, we did have Pauline Hanson on our program, Michael, and she really does get labelled very quickly. In actual fact, we found that she wasn't at all anti-Semitic, and she was had very strong views, quite favourable views to the Jewish community. She feels that she's being treated poorly by the Jewish community, but in any case, that was our experience. So, David?
Thank you for the question, and I won't be discreet. I'll be direct and blunt. We have no problem engaging with Pauline Hanson and people of One Nation on issues. There are certain things that we might disagree with, but on other issues, we do talk to them. There is no anti-Semitism there. Mark Latham, who's now in the New South Wales Parliament and is the New South Wales leader, has attended and spoke at an AJA event prior to the state election. We held a forum for small parties. Mark had his own supporters page on Facebook, and it got hijacked by anti-Semites, and there were all these ridiculous comments made on it. And then I saw a comment under his name which basically said, "This is intolerable, and if it doesn't stop, I'm deleting the page." And I sent him a message and asked if that was indeed him, or was it part of the hijack? And it was indeed him, and he pulled down his own supporters page because it had anti-Semitic comments at the time. If you go onto the AJA YouTube channel, you will see an interview that we did with Pauline Hanson. So you can go and just put her name in on the AJA YouTube channel. Now, I'll tell you something that's not widely known, but it perhaps answers your question, because actions are louder than words. One Nation has just been registered in South Australia. Their lead Senate candidate in the last election, and the person who is president of One Nation South Australia, is an Orthodox Jewish woman.
Okay. Michael's waiting furiously. Do you want to say something, Michael?
My name is Michael Bird. I'm one half of Nothing Left with Alan Friedman. Just answering the question about Pauline, we had her on our program, and one of the questions talked about Israel, and she said outright, and still on the recording that she supports moving the Australian government moving the embassy to Jerusalem, and she also recommends stop funding the Palestinians. Now that's something that I don't know how many even in the Liberal Party I've heard, be very vocal on that, let alone the Labor or the Greens. But what I wanted to ask is, I want to touch on two subjects. One David touched on, and one both Davids. And this was the uncomfortable subject of Jewish anti-Semitism. And David Southwood mentioned an organisation which I've been following for about 10 years, which is probably the largest Palestinian lobby group in Australia, APAN. Just recently, they just issued an award. So we're talking about Jewish anti-Semitism. The award went to a Jew, to probably the most prominent anti-Zionist Jew most people would know, Anthony Lowenstein. So there is already a connection between the largest Palestinian lobby group and some people in the Jewish community. In fact, I think the year before last, another group, a Jewish group, Australian Jewish Democratic Society, which is an affiliate of the JCCV, went with APAN up to Canberra to lobby for the Palestinians. And they're also aligned with another Jewish group, New Israel Fund, and Breaking the Silence. So there is a connection between a very, very powerful Palestinian lobby group who shouldn't be underestimated and the Jewish community, or some members of the Jewish community.
Okay, thanks, Michael. Now, Joseph, I think, is next, and then Donna and Mary.
Thanks, Alan. Just getting back to the topic of anti-Semitism, just a few viewpoints that I have about it is how it should be considered. What exactly is anti-Semitism, apart from the diagnosis, apart from the definition? But what does it actually mean? And we seem to forget that anti-Semitism through the ages has genocidal intent. It's genocide. It's a call to genocide. Whether you draw a swastika on the wall or whether you beat up a Jew, the intent is genocide, as has been proven over the many years. So I think we're tending to forget this, almost like frogs being boiled alive slowly, because when you look at anti-Semitism as genocidal, you can then look back and say, well, it's actually quite toxic. It's not a word. It's not just Jew hatred, but it's somebody or something out there creating a toxic environment with which to kill Jews, because ultimately it's death to the Jews. Hitler should have finished the job, etc., etc. And I think if we look at anti-Semitism in that light, with that sort of severity, I think our approach to how we deal with it could also change. And if we look at anti-Semitism as a toxic fungus, as a toxic fungus, and look at how a fungus actually grows, develops, spores, where it lives, how it lives, then perhaps we can also start to develop certain strategies as to cope with anti-Semitism. I don't think it's a virus or a morphed virus. It fits the definition of a fungal growth, a toxic fungal growth. The question is, how do we deal with it? Okay, we have this wonderful talk fest, we have politicians and lobby groups and laws created, and thank God for the laws because they protect us from the genocidal intent. But it doesn't actually stand up to anti-Semitism in the public. So the question is, why has there not been, or why can't there be, a populist movement of Jews and non-Jews to actually stand up and say, we don't want it? Because anti-Semitism in the past works in waves, and each new wave generates more anti-Semitism, it emboldens the future waves. And then as it emboldens, it enters politics and so on and so forth, exactly what we are witnessing at the moment. So I believe we need to start to form a populist movement that can actually stand up and protest against it. And I love your idea of pro-Semitism, because that's been my pet subject for the last 6 months. And I'd like to talk to you about that later.
Okay, I'll just ask for a response from the panel. The concept that we tend to forget that anti-Semitism has a genocidal backbone, if you like. Now, is that the way you might see things? And perhaps have we been a little neglectful in not focusing on that? I'll start with Gideon and then go to David.
Look, it's a hard one. It's a hard one, and I don't want to be contrary, but again, I make the point, I don't think we do ourselves a favour as a community by taking every stupid comment as an impending train to Auschwitz. Now, I take the point you're making. I think it is the Jews of Germany said that once upon a time, so we have to weigh that up, and you're right. We can't let things get so out of hand that we find ourselves in a very terrible situation, and I say that in the context of Jews leaving France. Israel's about to benefit from a huge...
I've got news for you, we're not in control.
Well, maybe not, but I think it's a matter of how we react as well. And I loved David's story about how Tyler, sorry, not your son didn't use his name, but how your son dealt with anti-Semitism at Geelong Grammar, because I think if you get overly defensive and yell and scream and bang your fist and frankly behave like so many people on the left who see racism and intolerance everywhere, then you're not going to win friends and influence people. I think it's about... you've got to isolate the lunatics and the neo-Nazis, the Palestinian freakazoids, so on and so forth. There are always going to be people who talk about, blood libels, all sorts of other things. So you give them the treatment and the respect they deserve. But for people who are genuinely ignorant, people who genuinely don't understand either what they're saying or the historical context of what they're talking about, I think in those circumstances you do need to bring people with you. And, we have the resources of the community to do that. So I think it's about finding ways to be smarter about how we handle this and bring people in.
Yeah, look, I would agree on a lot of what Gideon's just said. I think you've got to look at the extremism on all sides, the hard left and the hard right that, that have a specific motive to destroy, to wipe out as Michael Bird said before about APAN, they've got an agenda. It's not a conciliatory agenda. It's not to kind of work things through and have Israel working in conjunction with the Arab communities and living harmoniously together. That's not an agenda. That's not their agenda. You need to call those people out. You need to have full infantry attack on those individuals. But I think the big, broad group are in the middle. They're the gettables. They're the ones that we need to, if you like, you spoke, sir, about getting a movement together and spreading the word. That's what we need. There are already some really, really great stuff that's out there, and we need to continue to do it. If you look at a couple of organisations, just quickly, you've got AJAC that sends politicians, it sends people from the trade union movement, students, journalists to Israel, and showcases Israel and gives them a full view about what's going on. You've got the Australia-Israel Chamber of Commerce that takes business groups to Israel as well. Now, I've been to conferences when I had the innovation portfolio to have the head of Telstra standing up to a room, again, full of a big, broad corporate world, talking up how wonderful Israel is and some of the things, and half the speech would be on the great innovations from Israel. You've got others talking about water. If we can roll out the champions, I had somebody from the education department ring me on Friday afternoon and said to me, look, we're trying to get this teacher on a program to Israel. We've got some issues with the leave thing. Can you help us through? I said, yeah, I'll help you with anything to get them there. And they said, because we want to send teachers to Israel to learn about water and to learn about sustainability and all that kind of stuff. So education, positive stories, positive things about what we're doing, that will take the naysayers out of the game. That's the way we've got to change things.
You're right. Undoubtedly, you're right, Dave. Absolutely. But unfortunately, there's no Dustin Martin to stand up and say, I love Jews. And that's what we need in this community. We need people on high, people in politics, to actually stand up and say, love and respect your Jews. And we don't have that. Yeah, we have all of these missions on an individual basis. And during the Holocaust, or prior to the Holocaust, some of my best friends were Jewish, right? But that didn't help because the people didn't stand up for what they believed. And every time people don't stand up for what they believe, when they're under attack, it emboldens other people to attack further.
Okay, Joseph, the Australian Jewish Association is standing up, and hopefully
Yes.
we'll fill that role.
Yeah.
I've got Mary.
No, I want to also comment and take up the point about spreading some of the good stories. I'm very much involved, as you know, with spreading, with circulating articles about the political side. But I think apart from, in terms of education, apart from just talking about the Holocaust, which is so important, of course, we need to talk about modern Israel and some of the great things that Jews are doing in terms of even Israel aid. Everywhere where there's a disaster somewhere, you have Israeli teams setting up surgical and medical groups to help people, and things that even students can think of as not just Jews being victims all the time, but things that are very positive and very forward. You can and a different aspect of Israel that would open their eyes a little bit. So I think that would be great if it could include some of these modern aspects.
David,
I want to make just one point about the pro-Semitism and positive stories. I think that's a very...
I don't like the term pro-Semitism.
I know, I've got some reservations about the term.
Yes.
Tomorrow, AJA has another event. It's being organised by the Deakin University Liberal Students Association. And they've given us a topic. It overlaps tonight a little bit, but the topic is Western civilisation, free speech, and anti-Semitism. Now, if you think about the first part of that, it's a really interesting combination of topics. But Western civilisation translates in part to what is popularly called Judeo-Christian ethics or Judeo-Christian culture. Now, the Judeo was the first part of the foundation. There is enormous positive contribution that Jewish culture, Jewish wisdom, Torah values have made to Western society broadly. And I haven't engaged in this yet, but there is one thing that I've been thinking about. And we have a new organisation in this country called the Ramsay Foundation. The Ramsay Foundation, they're prepared to fund programs in Western civilisation. Western civilisation has a component, if you like, of pro-Semitism inherent in it. And I've been thinking maybe we should be approaching the Ramsay Foundation to look at what sort of things they might be prepared to support, not just Ramsay centres in universities, but whether they're prepared to support, put some resources behind those sort of ideas about positive stories, about foundations of Western civilisation, etc.
And just quickly as
well, there are really great opportunities from a number of the emerging communities. We've got a huge issues, as you can see in my portfolio of with crime and policing with the African communities. A lot of these young kids, a lot of the leadership, are just absolutely crying out for help. Now, we do communal groups quite well as a Jewish community. There's already a fair bit of engagement with a lot of those African leadership groups in terms of the work. That's where we need to be. We need to be working in and trying to bring some of those people with us. The Christian community have been pretty strong in some of the work that they've been doing. We've tried to do some work with the Chinese community that have come here to escape some of the stuff that they've got in terms of, and to come here into Australia and make a life. And there is a lot of similarities between the Chinese community in terms of family, education, support, the traditional values. There's a lot of great stuff that we can leverage in together. So there are a lot of groups that we should be tapping on and bringing with us to build that friendship. So the friendship needs to go beyond talking to ourselves to a lot of these other communities to bring them along with us. So I absolutely agree with that gentleman's thing before. You don't need me standing up there. You need the equivalent of it does, maybe not Dustin Hutton, but the equivalent of, or maybe, to be standing up and supporting us. That's when it is the most powerful, when you've got the non-Jew that's standing up and supporting the Jew.
Thanks, David. We're running a little late. We're over time, but nobody seems to be kicking us out just yet. So please keep the questions very short. We've got Dobber there and then Henry over.
Hi, good evening. If this doesn't work, I shall use my teachers. I'm addressing this basically to... Hello? I'm addressing this to David Adler specifically. I have a confession and I need some advice. I call the Jewish anti-Semites, I call them straight out traitors. They're traitors to the Jewish nation, to the Jewish family. What they don't realise is that once a Jew, you are always the Jew, they will let us know if, God forbid, it comes to the crunch. Now, the point I want to make is I come across these sometimes individually, and I want to know how to handle them, because I know it's tricky. I was actually flabbergasted to read about a particular guy that was mentioned before, who was given a prominent room in the Parliament, correct, for the award. Now, he's a traitor of the highest order, and if I come across him, I will tell him, or I don't know how to handle it. Sometimes I do come across individual people. I better be careful what I say. No, just a minute. If I come across them, how do I handle them? Not to convert them, but to make them see logic.
Okay. How to get irrational people to see logic.
That's got to be the hardest question of the night. And the truth is, I do not understand the answer. It is the most hurtful part of anti-Semitism for me. I've given longer talks on the subject, and one of the illustrations I didn't show, but I will now, seeing you've raised it, is this is a protest. It's a photo of a protest in the 1930s in America from some left-wing Jews, and the sign here on this one is "Hitler has not attacked us, why attack Hitler?" They're advocating that we should, be nice to Hitler, the American left-wing Jews. From biblical times, we had, you're right, they are Jews. They've got a neshama, like everyone in this room who's Jewish. They've lost their way for some reason. It's a terribly distressing thing. We had in Europe, in Germany, in the 1930s, there was a large group called the Verband National Deutsche Juden, the National Socialists of Jews, who also worked with the Nazis. In the USSR, there were Jewish groups who assisted Stalin in the suppression of the practice of Judaism. It's been with us the whole time. I'd love to get a rabbinical assessment of how you can turn these people. I provide the information when we can, the history, the examples. They do a lot of damage, and they embolden the other groups of anti-Semites to a significant degree. I'm sure you've seen examples on social media where they're being used to legitimise vilification of Israel. I'm sorry to disappoint you, I don't have a solution, but the first step in addressing the problem is to call it out, and that's why, as an organisation, we have started to call
the media always seem to correspond with those people. When they want an opinion about Jews, those are the people that they approach.
What they don't realise is we have enough enemies, let alone to have Jewish enemies.
Absolutely.
I'm being very blatant about it.
Okay, so just the last couple of questions. There's a lady here.
You started out the conversation that there is an analogy between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, and I completely agree with that. It's time, in my opinion, that we should get together and employ somebody who looks after the issue that all the reportage mostly is in favor of the poor Palestinians and what the Israelis are doing. Israelis didn't have good hasbara, and we in Australia don't have it. And it's time now to get some money together and employ somebody who would look after our interests in the newspapers. That a thing like this boy, for instance, who has been picked on, that the boys who were the perpetrators were 16 and he was only 12. Nobody mentions that. Nobody says how unfair it was that the boy had to leave school and the perpetrators, the bullies, got away absolutely scot-free. And because we are not strong, the education system works that they can just ignore it and sweep it under the carpet. And I'm suggesting that the young people can't afford to say, I'm very pleased that you had no anti-Semitism shown towards you, but I'm a child survivor of the Holocaust. And that's not acceptable to say it's not so bad. Some of it is all very good, but those things that are bad, the young people here have to stand up and say, yes, we're going to do something about it.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you. Anybody want to speak to that? Or I know Hillary wants to say something. Anybody? Or
we'll take a few comments and we can go back to that.
I actually have a question and a comment. As David knows, there's a group in America who have something called the Anti-Semite of the Week. And they, like Linda Sarsour was the Anti-Semite of the Week now in America. And they really, there it is, right? They really publicise this. The photograph, it's put out on Facebook, it's put out everywhere. And I like that. I think that's an excellent way to pick up people here and say, this is the Anti-Semite of the Week. Who was that young Muslim boy? You're the Anti-Semite of the Week. Okay, one thing. The other thing, I have a question. I am not Australian born, I'm South African born. I do not know enough about the education department, but is there any compulsory Holocaust education in the schools?
okay. Who wants David?
There is a unit, but it's not across all schools, and that is something that we're looking at the moment in terms of putting something up along those lines. I think that's really important.
I can tell you because I have been a crossing supervisor near the Holocaust Museum, the centre, and they have got tours from non-Jewish schools, about 3 or 4 a week, that come along for about a 1 or 2 hour tour.
About 20,000 kids go there a year
Yep.
from non-Jewish schools.
Yeah. And that's happening every week.
That's a good start. Okay, Horace?
I was outside and I missed some of the panel. I'd like to direct a question to Gideon. I'm not sure whether the media has been spoken about. Your work in the media on a constant basis. Perhaps you can provide us with some insight and personal experiences. We know about Q&A and the insiders and the age. And we've got the Murdoch press on our side. Do you encounter anti-Semitism in the media?
Yeah, no, I've touched briefly on that, and I've sort of started by saying that I personally, again, I've had the odd stupid comment, I've had the odd lunatic on Twitter and all sorts of other things, but I've been lucky in that respect too. Never feel like I've been discriminated against, never felt like there was anything I've been missing out on, anything else. To the lady who was a survivor, I'm sorry for your experience, and please hear me when I say I was not in any way intending to trivialise either that experience or any of the shocking incidents that we are seeing. I think all I was saying was that I think it is worth remembering and worth bearing in mind that the majority of the community, I believe, are decent people, and we are really dealing with either, again, hardcore lunatics or people who are just plain ignorant, and our job is to explain, to do a better job of defending Israel than we've been doing, and that Israel itself has been doing, but also to bring people with us. In terms of the media, look, there's a problem with anti-Israel bias, of course there is, but most of the outlets that will have me on do an extremely energetic job at calling it out and defending it and defending the state of Israel. And I think that we need more people who can put their hand up from our community and go and again do a better job than we've been doing.
ABC.
Yes.
Someone has to say something about the ABC in the context of that question. We have called out the ridiculous level of anti-Israel bias in the ABC. There was a particular conflict at the Gaza border some time ago, not the current one, where 170 rockets have been fired into Israel. Israel retaliated, and the ABC, as its lead item on the television news on a Sunday morning, started the coverage with Israel attacking the Palestinians in Gaza. If you had not been aware of what had occurred before, you could reasonably have gained the impression that for no reason Israel has started a war against the people of Gaza. Now, I wrote an article on that. I was on the Outsiders on that. You can see the material on our social media and YouTube channel. But the interesting thing that happened after that was that I got contacted by a couple of senior people in our community who said they had put together a portfolio of complaints that had been made to the ABC on the way that it reports Israel matters. This was years ago. I had a portfolio of about 45 or 50 pages, and the correspondence and writing complaints into the usual channels, backwards and forwards, getting absolutely nowhere. So I have given a copy of that document to one of your federal colleagues, David, who from this state, who's known to be very on side, and that's Senator James Patterson. I was in his office, and I gave him a copy of the portfolio of complaints that were not able to be progressed concerning ABC coverage. And I'm hoping that one day there might be some form of official inquiry into the ABC, and whether its funding can be reviewed or whatever. We have handed all our evidence to Senator James Patterson.
I could make one more comment about the ABC. My organisation is very, very pro selling off the ABC. Whatever it has to say, it should not be receiving our tax dollars to do it. So if you want to see the ABC sold off the highest bidder and hopefully shut down, join the RPA.
Okay, just very last word.
By the way, this weekend's Australia.
Yeah, excellent idea.
We could answer to this and say all the things that were said here tonight.
Can I end on perhaps an inspirational note to people such as Doba, who raised the question of anti-Semitism, and those that have said it's been here for a long time, including David, made that comment. The inspiration is this. I think that when we reflect, anti-Semitism actually proves the divinity of our texts. Both the Torah and the Nevi'im raise it squarely. You have Amnabada Nishkon Uvagoim Lo Yitchashav in Bamidbar. You have where the first person that mentioned the nation of Israel as Israel was our arch enemy Pharaoh, who issued an edict of genocide. And in the Navi says, he deals with inbred Jewish anti-Semitism, where those that would drag you down will come from your own ranks. So that toxic form of anti-Semitism was foreseen by our prophets, and wider anti-Semitism was forecast by our Torah 3,500 years ago.
Okay, on that sobering note, I just want to thank our three panellists. So please thank you for a very interesting evening. I want to thank you, the audience, because you've been fantastic and you've really participated well in the discussion. I just want to mention a couple of things. David, if you like David and Gideon, you can see more of them tomorrow night at the event, and the details are on the AGA Facebook page. Now, we need members. The Australian Jewish Association needs your support. We know that there's a lot of people that like what we do, but we need to demonstrate it by having a big membership database. So for the grand sum of $25 a year, we're asking you to join up. If you didn't get accosted on the way in, you'll get accosted on the way out. So please see one of the ladies and join the AJA. And very finally, the AJA is doing a mission to Israel next year. And it's starting to fill up. It's in May, I think, March next year. So there are leaflets at the front table, there's leaflets at the back, near the front door. If you're interested in coming along and seeing something a little bit different than the usual missions to Israel, have a look at it and please feel free to talk to us about it. On that note, I'll say thank you very much and have a good evening, everyone.